Hi everybody. I hope everybody's doing well this evening. I hope you guys are taking care of yourselves. I have some fun stories again for you guys tonight from my favorite collection. So, tonight's first story is called The Singing Bone. So, a certain country was greatly troubled by a wild boar that attacked workers in the fields, killed men, and tore them to pieces with its terrible tusks. The king of the country had offered rich rewards to anyone who would rid the land of this terror, but the beast was so huge and ferocious that no man would even be persuaded to enter the forest where the animal made its home. At last, the king made a proclamation that he would give his only daughter in marriage to any man who would bring the wild boar to him, dead or alive. There lived 2 brothers in that country, the sons of a poor man who gave notice of their readiness to enter on this perilous undertaking. The elder, who was clever and crafty, was influenced by pride. The younger, who was innocent and simple, offered himself from kindness of heart. Thereupon the king advised that as the best and safest way would be to take opposite directions in the wood, the elder was to go in the evening and the younger in the morning. The younger had not gone far when a little fairy stepped up to him. He held in his hand a black spear and said, "I will give you this spear because your heart is innocent and good. With this you can go out and discover the wild boar, and he shall not be able to harm you." He thanked the little man, took the spear, placed it on his shoulder, and without delay went further into the woods. It was not long before he espied the animal coming towards him and fiercely making ready to spring. But the youth stood still and held the spear firmly in front of him. In wild rage, the fierce beast ran violently towards him and was met by the spear, on the point of which he threw himself, and as it pierced his heart, he fell dead. Then the youngster took the dead monster on his shoulders and went to find his brother. As he approached the other side of the wood, there stood a large hall. He heard music and found a number of people dancing, drinking wine, and making merry. His elder brother was among them, for he thought the wild boar would not run far away, and he wished to get up his courage for the evening by cheerful company and wine. When he caught sight of his younger brother coming out of the forest laden with his booty, the most restless jealousy and malice rose in his heart. But he disguised his bitter feelings and spoke kindly to his brother and said, "Come in and stay with us, dear brother, and rest a while, and get up your strength by a cup of wine." So the youth, not suspecting anything wrong, carried the dead boar into his brother's house and told him of the little men he had met in the wood, who would give him the spear and how he had killed the wild animal. The elder brother persuaded him to stay and rest till the evening, and then he went up together in the twilight and walked by the river till it became quite dark. A little bridge lay across the river over which they had to pass, and the older brother let the young one go before him. When they arrived at the middle of the stream, the wicked man gave his younger brother a blow from behind, and he fell down dead instantly. But fearing he might not be quite dead, he threw the body over the bridge into the river, and through the clear water saw it sink into the sand. After this wicked deed he ran home quickly, took the dead wild boar on his shoulders, and carried it to the king, with the pretence that he had killed the animal, and that therefore he could claim the princess as his wife, according to the king's promise. But these dark deeds are not often concealed, for something happens to bring them to light. Not many years after, a herdsman passing over the bridge with his flock saw beneath him in the sand a little bone as white as snow, and thought that it would make a very nice mouthpiece for his horn. As soon as the flock passed over the bridge, he waded into the middle of the stream, for the water was very shallow, took up the bone and carried it home to make a mouthpiece for his horn. But the first time he blew the horn, after the bone was in it, it filled the herdsman with wonderful amazement, for it began to sing of itself, and these were the words it sang. "Oh, dear shepherd, you are blowing my horn with one of my bones, which night and morn lies till I'm buried beneath the wave, where I was thrown in a sandy grave. I killed the poor, and my brother slew me, and gained the princess by pretending 'twas he." "What a wonderful horn," said the shepherd, "that can sing of itself. I must certainly take it to my lord the king." As soon as the horn was brought before the king and blown by the shepherd, it at once began to sing the same song and the same words. The king was at first surprised, but his suspicions being aroused, he ordered that the sand under the bridge should be examined immediately, and then the entire skeleton of the murdered man was discovered, and the whole wicked deed came to light. The wicked brother could not deny the deed. He was therefore ordered to be tied in a sack and drowned, while the remains of his murdered brother were carefully carried to the churchyard and laid to rest in a beautiful grave. That's kind of sad. That's a little like Cain and Abel's story from the Bible, for you guys who know of that story. So far, I've seen that a lot of these stories are actually pretty sad and dark. Nothing like the kind of Disney happy endings that most of us are aware of. These are a little bit like, reality of life, if we could say. So, our next story is called Maid Maleen. There was once a king who had a son who asked in marriage the daughter of a mighty king. She was called Maid Maleen and was very beautiful. As her father wished to give her to another, the prince was rejected. But as they both loved each other with all their hearts, they would not give each other up. And Maid Maleen said to her father, "I can and will take no other for my husband." Then the king flew into a passion and ordered a dark tower to be built, into which no ray of sunshine or moonlight should enter. When it was finished, he said, "Therein shalt thou be imprisoned for 7 years, and then I will come and see if thy perverse spirit is broken." Meat and drink for the 7 years were carried into the tower, and then she and her waiting woman were led into it and walled up, and thus cut off from the sky and from the earth. There they sat in the darkness and knew not when day or night began. The king's son often went around and around the tower and called their names, but no sound from within pierced through the thick walls. What else could they do but lament and complain? Meanwhile the time passed, and by the diminution of the food and drink, they knew that the 7 years were coming to an end. They thought the moment of their deliverance was come, but no stroke of the hammer was heard, and no stone fell off the wall, and it seemed to Maid Maleen that her father had forgotten her. As they only had food for a short time longer, and saw a miserable death awaiting them, Maid Maleen said, "We must try our last chance, and see if we can break through the wall." She took the bread knife and picked and bored at the mortar of a stone, and when she was tired, the waiting maid took her turn. With great labor they succeeded in getting out 1 stone, and then a second, and a third, and when 3 days were over, the first rays of light fell on their darkness, and at last the opening was so large that they could look out. The sky was blue, and a fresh breeze played on their faces, But how melancholy everything looked all around! Her father's castle lay in ruins. The town and the villages were, so far as could be seen, destroyed by fire. The fields far and wide lay to waste, and no human being was being visible. When the opening in the wall was large enough for them to slip through, the waiting maid sprang down first, and then Maid Maleen followed. But where were they to go? The enemy had ravaged the whole kingdom, driven away the king, and slain all the inhabitants. They wandered forth to seek another country, but nowhere did they find a shelter or a human being to give them a mouthful of bread, and their need was so great that they were forced to appease their hunger with nettles. When, after long journeying, they came into another country, they tried to get work everywhere, but wherever they knocked, they were turned away, and no one would have pity on them. At last they arrived in a large city and went to the royal palace. There also they were ordered to go away, but at last the cook said that they might stay in the kitchen and be scullions. The son of the king in whose kingdom they were was, however, the very man who had been betrothed to Maid Maleen. His father had chosen another bride for him, whose face was as ugly as her heart was wicked. The wedding was fixed, and the maiden had already arrived. Because of her great ugliness, however, she shut herself in her room and allowed no one to see her, and Maid Maleen had to take her meals from the kitchen. When the day came for the bride and bridegroom to go to church, she was ashamed of her ugliness and afraid that if she showed herself in the streets, she would be mocked and laughed at by the people. Then said she to Maid Maleen, "A great piece of luck has befallen thee. I was sprained my foot, and cannot well walk through the streets. Thou shalt put on my wedding clothes and take my place, a great honor than that thou canst have." Maid Maleen, however, refused, and said, "I wish no honor which is not suitable for me." It was in vain, too, that the bride offered her gold. At last, she said angrily, "If thou dost not obey me, it shall cost thee thy life. I have but to speak the word, and thy head will lie at thy feet." Then she was forced to obey, and put on the bride's magnificent clothes and all her jewels. When she entered the royal hall, everyone was amazed at her great beauty, and the king said to his son, "This is the bride whom I have chosen for thee, and whom thou must lead to church." The bridegroom was astonished and thought, "She is like my Maid Maleen, and I should believe that it was she herself, but she has long been shut up in that tower, or dead." He took her by the hand and led her to church. On the way was a nettle plant, and she said, "Oh, nettle plant, little nettle plant, what dost thou here alone? I have known the time when I ate thee unboiled, when I ate thee unroasted." "What art thou saying?" asked the king's son. "Nothing," she replied. "I was only thinking of Maid Maleen." She was surprised that she knew about her, but kept silent. When they came into the footplank into the churchyard, she said, "Footbridge, do not break. I am not the true bride." "What art thou saying there?" asked the king's son. "Nothing," she replied. "I was only thinking of Maid Maleen." "Dost thou know Maid Maleen?" "No," she answered. "How should I know her? I have only heard of her." When they came to the church door, she once more said, "Church door, break not. I am not the true bride." "What art thou saying there?" asked he. "Ah," she answered, "I was only thinking of Maid Maleen." Then he took up a precious chain, put it around her neck, and fastened the clasp. Thereupon they entered the church, and the priest joined their hands together before the altar and married them. He led her home, but she did not speak a single word the whole way. When they got back to the royal palace, she hurried into the bride's chamber, put off the magnificent clothes and the jewels, dressed herself in her gray gown, and kept nothing but the jewel on her neck, which she had received from the bridegroom. When the night came, and the bride was to be led into the prince's apartment, she let her veil fall over her face, that he might not observe the deception. As soon as everyone had gone away, he said to her, "What didst thou say to the nettle plant which was grown by the wayside?" "To which nettle plant?" she asked. "I don't talk to nettle plants." "If thou didst not do it, then thou art not the true bride," said he. So she bethought herself and said, "I must go out into my maid, who keeps my thoughts for me." She went out and sought Maid Maleen. "Girl, what hast thou been saying to the nettle?" "I said nothing but, 'O nettle plant, little nettle plant, what dost thou here alone? I have known thee when I ate thee unboiled, when I ate thee unroasted." The bride ran back into the chamber and said, "I know now what I have said to the nettle," and she repeated the words which she had just heard. "But what didst thou say to the footbridge when we went over it?" asked the king's son. "To the footbridge," she answered. "I don't talk to footbridges." "Then thou art not the true bride," she again said. "I must go out unto my maid, who keeps my thoughts for me," and ran out and found Maid Maleen. "Girl, what didst thou say to the footbridge?" "I said nothing but, 'Footbridge, do not break, I am not the true bride.'" "That costs thee thy life," cried the bride, but she hurried into the room and said, "I know now what I said to the footbridge," and she repeated the words. "But what didst thou say to the church door?" "To the church door," she replied. "I don't talk to church doors." "Then thou art not the true bride." She went out and found her Maid Maleen and said, "Girl, what didst thou say to the church door?" "I said nothing but, 'Church door, break not, I am not the true bride.'" "That will break thy neck for thee," cried the bride, and flew into a terrible passion. But she hastened back into the room and said, "I know now what I said to the church door," and she repeated the words. "But where hast thou the jewel which I gave thee at the church door?" "What jewel?" she answered. "Didst thou not give me any jewel? I myself put it around thy neck, and I myself fastened it. If thou dost not know that, thou art not the true bride." He drew the veil from her face, and when he saw her immeasurable ugliness, he sprang back terrified and said, "How comest thou here? Who art thou?" "I am thy betrothed bride, but because I feared lest the people should mock me when they see me out of doors, I commanded the scullery maid to dress herself in my clothes and go to church instead of me." "Where is that girl?" said he. "I want to see her. Go and bring her here." She went out and told the servants that the scullery maid was an impostor, and that they must take her out into the country yard and strike off her head. The servants laid hold of Maid Maleen and wanted to drag her out, but she screamed so loudly for help that the king's son heard her voice, hurried out of his chamber, and ordered them to set the maiden free instantly. Lights were brought, and then he saw on her neck the gold chain which he had given her at the church door. "Thou art the true bride," said he, "who went with me to church. Come with me now to my room." When they were both alone, he said, "On the way to the church thou didst name Maid Maleen, who was my betrothed bride. If I could believe it possible, I should think she was standing before me. Thou art like her in every respect." She answered, "I am Maid Maleen, who for thy sake was imprisoned 7 years in the darkness, who suffered hunger and thirst, and has lived so long in want and poverty. Today, however, the sun is shining on me once more. I was married to thee in the church, and I am thy lawful wife." Then they kissed each other and were happy all the days of their lives. The false bride was rewarded for what she had done by having her head cut off. The tower in which Maid Maleen had been imprisoned remained standing for a long time, and when the children passed by it they sang, "Cling, clang, Gloria, who sits within this tower? A king's daughter she sits within. A sight of her I cannot win. The wall it will not break, the stone cannot be pierced Little Hans with your coat so gay, follow me, fast as you may. That was actually pretty nice. That wasn't as bad. I think it's because there wasn't, the death at least wasn't as gruesome, I would say. I don't know, in comparison, at least. I hope you guys don't mind my singing through this, it's kind of fun. Also, I don't know how I feel about the prince. Would you guys go back to the prince? After everything, she's kind of like, it's your fault that I went through this. So, I don't know. I might be like, I'm gonna survive and avenge myself. Cena, warrior princess. Alright. So, if you guys are up for it, I have one last story for you. This one is called The Skillfull Huntsman. Alright. There once was a young fellow who had learnt the trade of locksmith, and told his father he would now go out into the world and seek his fortune. Very well, said his father, I am quite content with that, and gave him some money for his journey. So he travelled about and looked for work. After a time he resolved not to follow the trade of locksmith any more, for he no longer liked it, but he took a fancy for hunting. Then there met him in his rambles a huntsman dressed in green, who asked whence he came and whither he was going. The youth said he was a locksmith's apprentice, but that the trade no longer pleased him, and he had a liking for huntsmanship. Would he teach it to him? Oh yes, said the huntsman, if thou wilt go with me. The young fellow went with him, bound himself to him for some years, and learnt the art of hunting. After this he wished to try his luck elsewhere, and the huntsman gave him nothing in the way of payment but an air gun, which had, however, this property, that it hit its mark without fail whenever he shot with it. Then he set out and found himself in a very large forest, which he could not get to the end of in one day. When evening came, he seated himself in a high tree in order to escape from the wild beasts. Towards midnight, it seemed to him as if a tiny little light glimmered in the distance. He looked down through the branches towards it, and kept well in his mind where it was. But in the first place, he took off his hat and threw it down in the direction of the light, so that he might go to the hat as a mark when he had descended. Then he got down and went to his hat, put it on again, and went straight forwards. The farther he went, the larger the light grew, and when he got close to it, he saw that it was an enormous fire, and that 3 giants were sitting by it, who had an ox on the pit, and were roasting it. Presently one of them said, I must just taste it if the meat will soon be fit to eat, and pulled a piece off, and was about to put it in his mouth, when the huntsman shot it out of his hand. Well, really, said the giant, if the wind has not blown off the bit out of my hand. He helped himself to another. When he was just about to bite into it, the huntsman again shot it away from him. On this, the giant gave the one who was sitting next to him a box on the ear and cried angrily, Why art thou snatching my piece away from me? I have snatched it away, said the other. A sharpshooter must have shot it away from thee. The giant took another piece, but could not, however, keep it in his hand, for the huntsman shot it out. Then the giant said, That must be a good shot to shoot the bit out of one's very mouth. Such an one would be useful to us. And he cried aloud, Come here, thou sharpshooter, seat thyself at the fire beside us, and eat thy fill. We will not hurt thee, but if thou wilt not come, we will bring thee by force. Thou art a lost man. At this invitation, the youth went up to them and told them he was a skilled huntsman, and that whatever he aimed at with his gun, he was certain to hit. Then they said if he would go with them, he would be well treated. And they told him that outside the forest there was a great lake, behind which stood a tower, and in the tower was imprisoned a lovely princess whom they wished very much to carry off. Yes, he said, I will soon get her for you. Then they added, but there are still something else there. There is a tiny little dog which begins to bark directly anyone goes near, and as soon as it barks, everyone in the royal palace wakes up, and for this reason we cannot get there. Canst thou undertake to shoot it dead? Yes, he said, that will be a little bit of fun for me. After this, he got into a boat and rowed over the lake, and as soon as he landed, the little dog came running out and was about to bark, but the huntsman took his air gun and shot it dead. Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. When the giants saw that, they rejoiced, and they thought they already had the king's daughter safe. But the huntsman wished first to see how matters stood, and told them that they must stay outside until he called them. Then he went into the castle, and all was perfectly quiet within, and everyone was asleep. When he opened the door of the first room, a sword was hanging on the wall, which was made of pure silver, and there was a golden star on it, and the name of the king, and on the table near it lay a sealed letter, which he broke open, and inside it was written that whosoever had the sword which could kill everything which opposed him. When he opened the door of the first room, a sword was hanging on the wall, which was made of pure silver, and there was a golden star on it, and the name of the king, and on the table near it lay a sealed letter which he broke open, and inside it was written that whosoever had the sword would kill everything which opposed him. So he took the sword from the wall, hung it at his side, and went onwards. Then he entered the room where the king's daughter lay sleeping, and she was so beautiful that he stood still, and holding his breath, looked at her. He thought to himself, how can I give an innocent maiden into the power of the wild giants, who have evil in their minds? He looked about further, and under the bed stood a pair of slippers. On the right one was her father's name with a star, and on the left her own name with a star. She wore also a great neckerchief of silk embroidered with gold, and on the right side was her father's name, and on the left her own, all in golden letters. Then the huntsman took a pair of scissors and cut the right corner off, and put it in his knapsack, and then he also took the right slipper with the king's name, and thrust that in. The maiden still lay sleeping. She was quite sewn into her night dress, and he cut a morsel from this also, and thrust it with the rest. But he did all without touching her. Then he went forth, and left her lying asleep undisturbed, and when he came back to the gate again, the giants were still standing outside waiting for him, and expecting that he was bringing the princess. But he cried to them that they were to come in, for the maiden was already in their power, and that he could not open the gate for them, but there was a hole through which they could creep. Then the first approached, and the huntsman wound the giant's hair around his hand, pulled the head in, and cut it off at one stroke with his sword, and then drew the rest of him in. He called the second and cut his head off likewise, and then he killed the third also, and he was well pleased that he had freed the beautiful maiden from her enemies, and he cut off their tongues and put them in his knapsack. Then he thought, I will go home to my father and let him see what I have already done, and afterwards I will travel about the world. The luck which God is pleased to grant me will easily find me. When the king in the castle awoke, he saw the 3 giants lying there dead. So he went into the sleeping room of his daughter, awoke her, and asked who could have killed the giants. Then said she, Dear father, I know not. I have been asleep. But when she arose and would have put on her slippers, the right one was gone, and when she looked at her neckerchief, it was cut, and the right corner was missing, and when she looked at her night dress, a piece was cut out of it. The king summoned his whole court together, soldiers and everyone else who was there, and asked who had set his daughter at liberty and killed the giants. Now it happened that he had a captain, who was one-eyed and a hideous man, and he said that he had done it. Then the old king said that as he had accomplished this, he should marry his daughter. But the maiden said, "Rather than marry him, dear father, I will go away into the world as far as my legs can carry me." The king said that if she would not marry him, she should take off her royal garments and wear peasant's clothes, and go forth, and that she should go to a potter and begin a trade in earthen vessels. So she put off her royal apparel and went to a potter and borrowed crockery enough for a stall, and she promised him also that if she had sold it by the evening, she would pay for it. Then the king said she was to seat herself in a corner with it and sell it, and he arranged with some peasants to drive over it with their carts so that everything would be broken into 1,000 pieces. When therefore the king's daughter had placed her stall in the streets, by came the carts and broke all she had into tiny fragments. She began to weep and said, "Alas, how shall I ever pay for the pots now?" The king had, however, wished by this to force her to marry the captain, but instead of that she again went to the potter and asked him if he would lend to her once more. He said no, she must first pay for the thing she had already had. Then she went to her father and cried and lamented and said she would go forth into the world. Then said he, "I will have a little hut built for thee in the forest outside, and in it thou shalt stay all thy life long and cook for everyone, but thou shalt take no money for it." When the hut was ready, a sign was hung on the door, whoever was written, "Today given, tomorrow sold." There she remained a long time, and it was rumored about the world that a maiden was there who cooked without asking for payment, and that this was set forth on a sign outside her door. The huntsman heard it likewise and thought to himself, "That would suit thee. Thou art poor and hast no money." So he took his air gun and his knapsack, wherein all the things which he had formerly carried away with him from the castle as tokens of his truthfulness were still lying, and went into the forest and found the hut with the sign, "Today given, tomorrow sold." He had put on the sword with which he had cut off the heads of the 3 giants, and thus entered the hut, and ordered something to eat to be given to him. He was charmed with a beautiful maiden who was indeed as lovely as any picture. She asked him whence he came, and whither he was going, and he said, "I am roaming about the world." Then she asked him where he had got the sword, for that truly her father's name on it. He asked her if she were the king's daughter. "Yes," she answered. "With this sword," he said, "did I cut off the heads of 3 giants," and he took their tongues out of his knapsack in proof. Then he also showed her the slipper and the corner of her neckerchief, and the bit of the night dress. Hereupon she was overjoyed and said that he was the one who had delivered her. They went together to the old king and fetched him to the hut, and she led him into a room and told him that the huntsman was the man who had really set her free from the giants. And when the aged king saw the proof of this, he could no longer doubt, and said that he was very glad he knew how everything had happened, and that the huntsman should have her to wife, on which the maiden was glad at heart. Then she dressed the huntsman as if he were a foreign lord, and the king ordered a feast to be prepared. When they went to the table, the captain sat on the left side of the king's daughter, but the huntsman was on the right, and the captain thought that he was a foreign lord who had come on a visit. When they had eaten and drunk, the old king said to the captain that he would set before him something which he must guess. Supposing anyone said that he had killed the 3 giants, and he were asked where the giant's tongue were, he were forced to go and look, and there were none in their heads. And how could that happen? The captain said, "Then they cannot have had any." "Not so," said the king. "Every animal has a tongue." And then he likewise asked what anyone would deserve who made such an answer. The captain replied, "He ought to be torn in pieces." Then the king said he had pronounced his own sentence, and the king was put in prison and then torn in 4 pieces. But the king's daughter was married to the huntsman. After this he brought his father and mother, and they lived in their son in happiness. And the death of the old king, he received the kingdom. The end. Oh, that one was a dark one. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of physical violence in some of these stories. I apologize. I never thought that some of these might be rated PG due to violence. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed these stories so far. I might have to save some of the extra gruesome ones for Halloween. It would be fun for you guys to see my face while I'm reading this. It's I get quite a surprise. Well, everybody have a good night. Again, continue to stay safe and take care of each other. Thank you for listening.